are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, award-winning volunteer for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Today is September 18th, and this is episode 191 of Lighthearted. We're going to hear two interviews in today's episode. First, we'll hear my conversation with Emily Sullivan, the curator of the Cape Cod Maritime Museum, and then we'll hear an interview with two people involved with the preservation of the Verona Beach Lighthouse in New York. So, Cindy, anything new from the Tucson, Arizona office of Lighthearted?
Well, it's a long summer here, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
We could use some more rain. But other than that, things are good. We're still seeing some neat creatures here, tarantulas once in a while, the great horned owls that have been here, lots of hummingbirds, as usual. I'll actually be in New Hampshire on a trip home in mid-September when this airs, and I'll definitely be swinging by our beloved Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse while I'm there.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll hopefully see you there or somewhere during your stay, maybe for a lunch or something like that.
Yeah, you and
Michelle
Charlotte and Michelle, our other regular co-host.
We'll have a lighthearted party.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about those tarantulas. I'm not sure I
it takes a little getting used to, but they're really neat, and they can't hurt you. They're really neat to watch, and I don't know. My mom just loves them. If you saw them in your house,
right.
I'd probably jump on the bed and scream. But seeing them outside, they're really neat.
I take your word for it, but you can keep them in Arizona.
Yeah, no, they're different.
Well, this is not actually a podcast about tarantulas, so we should probably talk about lighthouses a bit. So the lighthouse season, nice segue here. The lighthouse season is starting to wind down here in the Northeast. Lots of lighthouse organizations, of course, as you well know, close their properties by Columbus Day weekend in October. Mm-hmm. But some lighthouses in warmer parts of the country stay open all year, of course. Here at Portsmouth Harbor Light in New Hampshire, we have a few more weeks of tours by reservation, Friday evenings and Sunday afternoons. You can book a tour at portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. We also have a lighthouse cruise from Rye, New Hampshire on September 24th, Saturday, September 24th in the morning. Last time I checked, which is just before we started recording, there were just a few spaces left. By the time people hear this on September 18th, it may be sold out. But if people are interested, they should check out our website because might still be spaces available.
Definitely.
So, Cindy, has anything interesting happened on the state lighthouse history?
Yes. On September 18th, 1873, a hurricane destroyed the lighthouse and keeper's house on Dog Island off Carabel on Florida's Panhandle. Congress appropriated funds for a replacement, but it was never built because it was decided there wasn't enough maritime traffic in the area. In 1999, a team of maritime archaeologists discovered the remains of Dog Island Lighthouse using side-scan sonar.
That's right. The submerged brick ruins are located off the coast of the island because the island itself is actually slowly migrating toward land. The site was reinvestigated by Florida State University archaeologists in 2006, and remains of the keeper's house were also found. So let's go to our first interview. Cindy, please help me tell our listeners about the Cape Cod Maritime Museum and our guest, Emily Sullivan.
Sure, Jeremy. The Cape Cod Maritime Museum in Hyannis, Massachusetts, focuses on Cape Cod's rich maritime history along with boat building, yachting, and nautical art. The museum strives to enable audiences of all ages to understand and enjoy maritime culture through exhibitions, public events, and educational programs.
The museum is developing a new exhibit on lighthouses that opens on October 20th. Other exhibits focus on the cod fishing industry and whaling, the history of navigation, the shellfish of Cape Cod, and more. There's also an extensive scrimshaw collection and historic Cape Cod wooden boats.
There's a lecture series and other offerings, including a Young Mariners summer program for kids and a boat building program. The museum's location in Hyannis puts it a short drive from many other attractions, including Cape Cod's lighthouses and ferries to Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket.
Emily Sullivan is the curator for the Cape Cod Maritime Museum, and I had a chance to speak with her during a recent visit to the Cape. So let's listen to that conversation now. I'm here today at the Cape Cod Maritime Museum in Hyannis, Massachusetts. I'm with Emily Sullivan, who is the curator of the museum. And I'll just mention, I thought we were going to do this interview yesterday, but the weather had other ideas, and I ran into flooding at the Sagamore Bridge. So I'm really happy to be here this morning. Thanks so much, Emily, for being on the podcast and for hosting me at the museum here today.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Very excited to meet you in person after I've been bothering you via email for help with our lighthouse exhibit.
Yeah. Oh, it's no bother. I'm really, really happy to help. And I'll mention that I had never been in the museum before. So coming in, one of the first things you see is an exhibit on the wall on the left about Bishop and Clerk's Lighthouse, one of the now lost local lighthouses in the Hyannis area, and it's nicely done. I was really happy to see that there.
Well, thank you. I think that is not our current newest exhibit. It's maybe second newest. It was put up earlier this year, I believe, very early or late last year, but it was done mostly by our public programs person, Mary Everett, who is currently helping our summer campers out, but she was sort of lending a hand with some of the exhibit stuff before I got pulled in. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's nice. So first of all, I understand you are relatively new here. You started early this year, is that correct?
I started in February.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about that, but why don't we just start by, could you give a brief history of how did this museum come about? How and when was it established?
Sure. So technically we were incorporated as an organization in 1998, but we've had a physical presence in Hyannis since 2004, 2005-ish. You know, it takes a long time to get a museum off the ground once you kind of have the idea of, you know, we want to get it together and raise funds and where is it going to go and how are we going to get our collections and what do we want the museum to be about. But really the sort of founding idea was that most of the folks who founded the museum are, you know, huge boat enthusiasts, particularly traditional wooden boats built on the Cape. And, you know, there are lots of different really great historical societies and museums on the Cape, but most of them don't necessarily specifically focus on our maritime history and heritage. So they thought this would be a really great opportunity, particularly in Hyannis, which is sort of, you know, for a lot of people kind of your jumping off point into the rest of the Cape, or at least like a central area, because it's where we've got the ferries. It's, you know, mid-Cape, so you're kind of like, if you're more up or down, you might come through here one way or another. So just a good place to kind of centralize a lot of that history and try and find a way to, you know, get people thinking about our traditional watercraft and, you know, the different industries and stuff like that that really make Cape Cod, Cape Cod.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have been to Cape Cod, but for those who haven't, Hyannis, like you said, is very centrally, geographically very, very centrally located. It's also kind of the commercial center of the Cape.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
The largest community, although it's actually officially part of the town of Barnstable, right?
Yes, which is very confusing for a lot of folks because I know, you know, certain like weather applications and stuff like Hyannis isn't an option you can pick, and it's like, well, it's sort of its own thing, but it's actually part of Barnstable.
Yeah,
and
officially it's the village of Hyannis, right? But it's a big village, big community. Speaking of such things, you were just showing me around a little bit in the museum, and you made the point that even though it's in Hyannis / Barnstable, that it's not just a museum for Hyannis and Barnstable. It is the Cape Cod Maritime Museum, so the exhibits cover a lot of ground.
Yeah, correct. Our mission statement is the Cape and the islands, so we also try and get some stuff about, you know, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket in here as well. Yep. Again, obviously, they've got, you know, their own dedicated museums and historical societies, but it's like this is all sort of part of one bigger story, and we want to make sure that everybody sort of feels that, you know, their history and story is really preserved here and, you know, kind of support each other's missions and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's good. So if I could ask you just a little bit more about yourself, how did you come to this position? How did you come to be curator here at this museum?
So as I was saying to you before we started, I was sort of stuck in the DMV area after grad school, not, you know, unwillingly necessarily, but that's kind of just, I went to school down there, and that's where I got
DMV
jobs.
Area meaning?
DC, Maryland, Virginia.
Okay.
And so I was originally, after grad school, I was working at an exhibit consulting firm called History Associates Incorporated that does a lot of just does pretty much anything you could want a historian to do. But what I specifically did a lot of work with them for was we'd get clients who, for whatever reason, didn't have the staff or the budget to do their own exhibit script writing or like image research and rights negotiation and stuff like that. So me and my coworkers would usually kind of get a bit of a, an outline from the museum of this is what we want our exhibits to be. Can you go out and do the research and write all this stuff for us and find the pictures we want to use and stuff like that. Occasionally we'd give advice about what kind of artifacts they might want to pull from their collection to be on display. So worked for them for about 4 years. Then the pandemic happened and I sort of fell into a position with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service that was looking for their first in-house historian. So that was an interesting job because I had probably maybe 5 total in-office days just because of shutdowns and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
So it was it was very interesting. Got to do a lot of really cool sort of uncovering a lot of sort of departmental history that has sort of been neglected or forgotten about. Their goal is hoping that people will start to sort of understand. When you say U.S. Postal Inspection Service, you'll have an idea of what they are and who they are and what they do, the same way if I say FBI, CIA, stuff like that. So worked with that for a while, but was really, the pandemic just was sort of really getting into a point where I'm originally from New England and my family still lives up here. So I was starting to look for jobs that was closer to home so that it was like if we were continuing to be in more of a lockdown, can't move around too much, I would be closer to family. Yeah. And happened upon this job listing and thought it sounded like a really great little organization. Again, as a New Englander, you just kind of have to be interested in maritime history, at least in passing.
I agree.
So, you pick up all this sort of stuff. And I was like, all right, I summered on the Cape as a kid and, have always been interested in I've always been interested in coming from a small town in Connecticut. It's always fun to try and find ways where your local history sort of connects to a bigger national story or, stuff where it's just like, oh, I had no idea that, there's this connection to this thing that everybody knows about, but like it's very specific to, this part of the world. And I thought this was a great opportunity to kind of talk about that. And as I've, started doing a lot of my, introductory research in my first few months here, it was really cool uncovering all this stuff of like, oh, I came here as a kid and didn't really appreciate like, oh, the Cape is this, hub of all this like really interesting maritime industry and like just things of they planned aspects of the D-Day landings here. There's a connection to the Titanic, like all this sort of stuff where it's like, okay, this is really cool history that a lot of people who come to the Cape don't really know, or because you're just here for the beaches and the lobster rolls and all that kind of stuff. So it was a great opportunity to sort of be like, okay, well, how can we sort of sit down and educate people about here are this isn't just a tourist destination that you come to for fun. It's been a major player in all these different things. But then also, once you kind of have that, it's also like we have all these really interesting local stories as well that it's like you can't really get this story anywhere else because it's very Cape specific. So things like our lighthouses or, just all the sort of, very interesting, like traditional watercraft and traditional methods of, I was going to say harvesting fish, but I guess that's not technically really...
Oh, I think that's an okay term.
Shellfish, yeah. At least catching fish. Basically, I was immediately like, this just sounds like a really cool opportunity, and I was very fortunate that our executive director really, we gel really well. So she was like, oh my gosh, how soon can you get here? And I was like, as soon as you need me to. And we got started in February, so I've been here for, I guess, about 6 months now, and it's been a really good time so far. We've got a great group of people working here.
Yeah, that seems like a really good fit. So could you tell me a little bit about what some of the major exhibits are here? And actually part 2 to that question is, and I don't know, this might not be so easy to answer, but would there be specific exhibits here that do you think would be of interest to lighthouse buffs?
Well, besides our Bishop and Clerks exhibit, which we've already mentioned, which is probably the most obviously of interest, we currently have a bunch of our exhibits, or a bunch of our historical exhibits right now are themed around Provincetown because, as we were saying, we want to bring in Cape stories from all over the Cape, and we hadn't really historically done anything about kind of lower Cape stuff. So we've got whaling, cod fishing, and the Portland Gale, which Portland Gale is probably my favorite exhibit we have up right now because it's a really interesting story. And we've got some really cool artifacts on loan from our friend Richard Bunasar. I know him. Yeah. So he was very generous to loan us some stuff that washed up on shore from the wreck. So just some really cool stuff to be able to see. We've got a great model of the Portland by Keith Richards, who's one of our board members.
He's not a guitarist for the Rolling Stones.
No.
If I could interrupt for just a second,
Sure.
the Portland Gale that you're mentioning is one of the really famous New England shipwrecks happened in 1898. In the Portland Gale of 1898, named for the wreck of the ship, with about 200 people lost in the wreck, kind of out in the middle of Cape Cod Bay. I think for a long time people thought it was closer to the Cape than it was, but it was been found in relatively recent years. So I just thought I'd fill in a little bit there.
And we've been very fortunate to, because our board members are all similarly sort of, historical nerds like we all are listening to this podcast and talking here. They've got really great collections that they're always really, generous with, letting us loan things, or when they're deciding, hey, I need to kind of, downsize or whatever. They usually, come to us first, which means we've got some really cool stuff. We're a small institution, but we have some really cool stuff in our collections and are always, sort of trying to find ways to make sure that that's really available to the public to, actually get up and close and personal with some of the local history. So.
Yeah. And you mentioned Richard Bonasar, who's lent you some artifacts from the Portland. I imagine he's lent you some things to do with the life-saving service as well.
Yes, he is actually part of the reason we're doing our new exhibit about lighthouses. Is he gave us two very generous sort of sets of lighthouse keepers equipment, and then stuff related to the life-saving service and the Mass Humane Society. So that has really been just a very exciting thing. We're very eager to get out there for people to take a look at. So our new lighthouse exhibit is it is scheduled to open in October 20th, I think is our opening day. And the life-saving service stuff we're going to use as part of a big exhibit about the history of the Mass Humane Society and the life-saving service, because they're sort of, stories that go very well together, which should be opening next spring. We don't have an official opening date for it just yet, but we'll hopefully have a more firm one once we kind of get into the winter and I can really sit down with it and start getting everything organized.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So if people come in the 2023 season, these exhibits will be up and going.
We should also have 2023 in the fall. We're doing a big exhibit about women's history, which is going to include some stuff about female lighthouse keepers on the Cape.
Great.
They are also getting featured in our lighthouse exhibit opening this October, but you can't sort of forget to include them in an exhibit about women's history, which has been that one's been a fun one to do some research with, because it's again just sort of a thing of, in the past, our museum has really focused a lot on the very technical aspects of boat building, and then also history that is sort of very geared towards a white male audience. And we thought, that's all, like, we're not saying we don't want to continue to tell that story, but it would be nice to include other stories as well. So we've thought, one of our big projects that we've been working on is a fairly large exhibit about women's history and just in general, all the different ways in which women have really contributed to our maritime history and heritage on the Cape. So we've kind of broken it down into stuff of people like women in STEM, women artists, women lighthouse keepers kind of get their own section because it's sort of an unusual profession, but women in business, women in politics, and women in the military. So that should be opening this fall. And then we also have an exhibit that's sort of similarly related to that, which is going to be talking a little bit about, or not a little bit, it is about the Loran station operated in Chatham by all female members of the Coast Guard during World War II. That should also be opening this spring.
Wow.
We had to do a little bit of shifting around because the women's history exhibit was originally going to be opening in spring, and then we're trying to get a grant to help fund parts of it, and it just, the timeline works better for it to open in the fall, so we've had to kind of, originally, like, life-saving service was also going to be opening in the fall, so it's just been a whole reshuffling. So
yeah, well, it's all exciting.
Yeah.
And I hope to come back next year and see these.
Yeah, absolutely.
These exhibits. Yeah. I'll just mention one more thing about Richard Bonasar. He actually owns a life-saving station in Plymouth, Massachusetts, at what's called the Gurnet, end of the Long Peninsula there. It's right near Plymouth or Gurnet Lighthouse. And I've been to both his station and the lighthouse several times.
He recently had a book come out about
Yes,
Point. Yeah.
I have it, yeah.
Oh, good.
Gurnet Point, I think, is the name of the book. Yeah, he did a great job with it. I would love to have him on the podcast, but he tends to be kind of quiet about things and likes to be behind the scenes.
Yeah, he's a little, not quite reclusive because he's, out and about and friendly with folks and stuff, but definitely a little reluctant to sit down and have a yarn sometimes.
Yeah, maybe I can talk him into being on the podcast. So anything else about the Lighthouse exhibit that people might be interested in hearing?
So what we're basically planning is it's going to have a brief overview of sort of the history of why we have lighthouses on the Cape, because, for a lot of people who come here at this point in history, it's just sort of, like Chatham, Nauset, etc. are just kind of fun things that you look at, take a picture. You don't really think about how, like, these were crucial to saving lives in periods before GPS and, radar and stuff like that. And I mean, lighthouses and, lightships and stuff like that are still very useful for, navigational aids in today's society. It's just, we rely on them less than we did in periods before we had all this technology. So we, want to sort of give that context of, these aren't just pretty buildings that people erected because they thought, oh, this will be fun to have in my backyard. They were really, again, a crucial part of life on the Cape. And once we've kind of given that story, we really are kind of transitioning a little bit more into lighthouse keepers and what they had to do to keep the lights lit, because we were very generously gifted a very impressive collection of lightkeeper tools from our friend Richard Bunasar. I can't say with 100% certainty, but it's one of the most complete sets of like brass lightkeeper equipment that'll in basically any museum that we're sort of aware of at this point. So we've got like a dustpan, an oil drip pan, the different oil measure cups. So all of that is going to be out on display. We're very excited about it because it's a really cool set, and people have really, when we've kind of given a little bit of sneak previews while our collections assistant was starting to catalog everything, people were very like, oh my gosh, what is this? And I, what, oh my, and like one of the cans still like reeks of kerosene. So you're not going to necessarily get the smell experience when it's out on display, but it's just, when we've sort of given it, when we've shown people it as a, a preview, it's always been a really fun reaction of just, wow, like, this hasn't had oil in it for God knows how long. And it's still just really, really strong.
That smell stays around. We have an oil house at Portsmouth Harbor Light where I spend a lot of time, and it hasn't had kerosene in it probably since the 1920s, and it still smells like kerosene.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So basically we're going to have a lightkeeper uniform. We've got a lens polishing cloth, a pennant, and most of this stuff he was able to find in either from good provenance that it was originally from the Cape, or at least antique shops that are, in New England and stuff. So we don't necessarily have positive identification of all of it was used at Chatham, but like it's something that was used at least in this area, which I also think is kind of fun because at the point that we've gotten the equipment from, everything has been standardized by the lighthouse service. I'm still thinking about the USLSS exhibit.
Yeah.
It's still fun that it's like, it's not just something of, we found this in California. It's something that was used here. So, and then we're going to kind of conclude the exhibit with a little bit of a discussion of lighthouses today and, talk about sort of preservation efforts and, things that threaten these historic structures and, kind of just try and conclude on a note so that folks sort of think about when you do drive by, it's not just something that is always going to exist if we just sort of let it hang out. It's like, no, these take active, you need to take active care of them, even if they're just a historic building versus, actively being used and stuff like that. So, yeah. Absolutely.
That all sounds good to me. Like you're touching on all the important aspects of it. So that's going to be great. I really look forward to it. I applaud you for doing that. So if you just could touch on a couple other things here. What is your Young Mariner program at the museum?
So our Young Mariner program is our summer camp. This is its second year in operation. It's mostly a STEM-focused camp. We want to get kids sort of, out on the water, thinking about our local maritime ecosystems and, also giving them, it's not a full sailing camp. The kids are not going to come off here ready to take a sunfish out on the lake, but they learn some basics of navigation and how boats work, how boats are designed. The general curriculum involves, weather permitting, we take them out every day on our catboat or our research vessel adventure to go around Hyannis Harbor. Today they were supposed to go out to an oyster farm to chat with the farmers and talk about how our shell fishing industry has sort of grown and evolved over the years, but unfortunately I think there was a bit of an incident last night with the wind, so the oyster farm is closed for business today. But we've got that. They come back to the museum to do a little bit of interaction with our exhibits so that, you can sort of get an appreciation for some of the other stuff that you can't necessarily teach out on the water. And then in the classroom, we've also got microscopes. So when you take water samples or smaller critters, you can get under there and take a look at them. So it's really just a great opportunity for kids to really get a better appreciation for, again, not just like, oh, boats are pretty and that, they work somehow. This is how we actually can make a boat float, and how, why hulls are particularly shaped the way that they are, or how why is something sail powered versus a motorboat. And then, thinking about things like what critters call this part of the world home, how can we take better care of them, how can we interact peacefully with the world around us and stuff. And there is a little bit of the history element as well, just because, you want to make sure that that's part of the story when you're talking about, well, why are we, farming oysters versus just going out and, looking for them in Hyannis Harbor. But it's mostly STEM focused. So we're very excited about it. I think this year, I don't have the exact figures, but we do offer scholarship programs for locals. And I want to say maybe approximately 50% of our kids are on scholarship, which is a really great opportunity, just to make sure that we're, supporting our local families and stuff, and giving opportunities to folks in the area. It's for both locals and tourists. It runs for 4 days during the summer. I think we started at the end of our first week was maybe June 28th, and we are wrapping up at the end of the month or early next month. So next year it'll probably be approximately the same weeks. We're hoping that as the program grows and develops, it'll be something we can offer all year round, or at least a version of it, because you might not necessarily want to be going out in the water in February if it's real icy out there. But just a good opportunity to try and continue to build that relationship with the next generation, of making sure that they're good stewards of our local area. So
yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I was just thinking how the museum is the Cape Cod Maritime Museum. It's not the Cape Cod Maritime History Museum. It covers history, but also the present and future of the environment here as well.
Yeah, that's something we really, feel very passionately about. In particular, with our sort of, exhibit schedule moving forward and stuff, we're always trying to think of making sure we have at least one or two exhibits that sort of talk about our natural history and kind of where we're at and how we're going and where we might be in the future, just to kind of keep that in mind for folks of like, hey, it's great that we're working to try and, preserve whale species on the Cape, but what are the threats that still face them? It's not just we don't hunt them for whale oil anymore, everything's great, so it's nice that we are able to sort of have that voice and have a bunch of opportunities to sort of tell that story and make it clear that it's not just history is in the past and it's done. It's like we're constantly changing, things are always evolving. And when we're sort of thinking too about a lot of our public programming, we kind of want to lean towards that of like, we want to make sure that we are doing stuff that's like what's sort of the cutting edge in boat design, or what's currently a thing that scientists are concerned about with our seashores and stuff like that. So when we do our lecture series and stuff, we're also trying to keep that in mind, just to try and keep the conversation going.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned it, I was going to ask you about the lecture series. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Sure.
So our lecture series is run by our public programming specialist, Mary, who I've already mentioned. And basically she sort of chunks up the year into different seasons. So I think our next sort of scheduled time is October through May, I want to say, is what we're kind of looking at for fall and winter and spring. And the lectures are held approximately every other Sunday. We're doing it via Zoom right now, just because people are still justifiably concerned about the pandemic. But we're hopeful, fingers crossed, although we said this last year too, so who knows, that we'll be able to start going back in person maybe this spring, while also trying to find a way that if we do go in person, find a way to make sure that we're recording it so that if you can't make this session in person, you'll be able to access it online. Yeah. So right now, all of our past Zooms are available on our website. We've got a really great array of different topics, from horseshoe crabs to lighthouses with Jeremy.
I happen to know a little bit about that.
And stuff. We're always trying to look for folks who have recent interesting stories about sailing trips they've taken on, on their vessels, or folks who have, experience with the Coast Guard or the Navy, people who are knowledgeable about other historical topics. So it's a really great broad array of stuff we have available, and I'm very excited. It's something that we're still trying to make accessible to folks even when they can't come down here, because since we do it in the off season, I know it's something where it's like, if you're someone who does come to the Cape mostly in the summertime, it's kind of a bummer when you don't have programming at an institution that you like that you can watch from your couch, or you'd have to trek down here to see it. So it's nice that we've tried to make it a little bit more available to folks when they're not necessarily on Cape.
Yeah. I did a presentation on Nantucket Sound lighthouses for the museum early last year, and it was a pleasure. And I believe that's still available online, right? Yeah. It was great to be involved in that. So, and there's also a rowing program, sorry?
Yes. So our rowing program is it's an opportunity to row in a traditional fixed seat rowing gig. So it's not the sort of shell that you'd be doing in like college rowing or anything like that. So it's a really cool opportunity. It's not really the sort of vessel that you're just going to kind of stumble across in other gyms or rowing memberships. They meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays, usually with sessions in the very early morning and sort of late afternoon after folks are off work. We offer $10 taster sessions, and then it's $150 per year for a membership to the whole season. And I think they go, Liz is the one who's more knowledgeable about it, because she actually participates. But I think it's weather permitting, mostly all year thing. So if you like to row, it's a really great opportunity to get out on the water, meet with other folks who really are passionate about it, and just a good group of folks to get out and have some fun with on a Thursday or on a weekend. So yeah.
That's great. And there's so many programs you have here, but I just need to ask you, what is the annual Scholars Prize? I saw that on the website.
That's another new program that we've just launched within the last year or so, but it's aimed at high school juniors in Barnstable. And basically, students can write essays either about Cape Cod maritime history or Cape Cod marine biology. And then we have a panel of judges that reviews the essays and awards first prize $1,000, second prize $500, and third $250. So just another way to try and get our local kids sort of excited about and thinking about their community and the history and ecology of the area and stuff like that. So another great opportunity to try and also give back to our local community, because it's something too where I feel like a lot of people kind of have I don't necessarily know this for certain, but I feel like there is occasionally an impression in tourist communities that when it's a museum or whatever, that you're maybe not sort of there for locals, and that's not true. We are, really, this is not something where it's like, oh, we don't want you to come here unless you've got, you're just here for a week. It's like, no, this is like we want this to be a community center for people to come and learn about their community. So just another way to try and foster that kind of yeah.
Well, I love it. It's a great philosophy, and I think a lot of lighthouse organizations could learn something from this. You've got me thinking about possibilities. So just one other program I want to touch on. You have a boat building program also.
We do. So we have a working boat shop downstairs. Our boatwright is here basically 5 days a week, working on restoring historic boats. He's also just a general huge asset to our museum, because he's always ready and willing to help with any installation or repairs and stuff that needs to get done. But he is currently working on restoring a beetle cat, which he's almost done with. But the boat building program we run in conjunction or through Barnstable Recreation. So for kids in grades 6 through 8 in Barnstable, you can apply to do a boat building program, which runs from October through December. And the kids basically learn all the nuts and bolts of, this is how you build a boat, and you build a boat at the end of it. So actually, when I interviewed for the job and was still sort of Liz wanted, because I was in Maryland, I'd interviewed via Zoom. Liz wanted me to come to the museum and see it in person before I said yes, because, this is where you're going to be working. And when I dropped by, it was right before Christmas, and so the kids were just finishing up their boat, and the session that was last year, the mother of one of the kids bought the boat for her daughter as a Christmas present, and the boat was named the Cinco Amigos, because there were 5 kids in the boat building class that built off it. And I was just like, that's such a sweet, like, amazing Christmas present, first of all. But just, it's a great way to sort of give kids, again, an understanding of like, this is how boats work, but also it's a great practical application for a lot of math that, I was not really a math kid growing up, but like had I, when you're in geometry, you kind of sit there and think like, when am I ever going to need to know this?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, here's why you need to know this. And sure, you may never build a boat again, but isn't it cool that you've, done this application? And then you also never know when you're working with kids that age too, of like, I got interested in history because of a program that I did in elementary school that was like a living history thing at our local museums. And so it's like, who knows if these kids are maybe going to grow up to become, boat builders or architects or some other kind of, hands-on career because they did this when they were in 6th grade,
Yeah.
So.
But things like that just give kids such a sense of accomplishment, which is so important.
Absolutely.
Can carry over to everything. So.
Yeah, and I mean, how cool to be able to take out your own boat that you built with your own 2 hands at, when you're in 7th grade.
Wow. That is tremendous.
Yeah.
So I have 2 last questions for you, and these are for bonus points. Okay. All right. So the first of my last questions is, this is a very general question. You can take it any way you want, but a lot of we have listeners all over the country, of course, and some in other countries as well. For lighthouse or maritime history buffs, or just history buffs in general, let's just say for anybody who's never visited Cape Cod, what would you tell them? Why should they come to Cape Cod?
Oh, that's such a difficult question to keep in, like,
to rein it in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so the Cape, I mean, is just a really beautiful place, just in all senses of the word. Like, everything about it is just from the architecture of the local buildings to, the wildlife that live here and everything. It's gorgeous. But also I really feel like from a history standpoint, it's such an interesting community because for a very long time, it was a little bit sort of isolated from the rest of not just Massachusetts, but it was, for a long time, the Cape was very rural and very, kind of, if not underdeveloped compared to necessarily like other parts of New England. It was just kind of there doing its own business. But at the same time, the people who lived here had these insane adventures from the perspective of someone from like the 1850s, where, if you were living in, central Illinois on your farm, you don't get to do things like go on a boat and visit China. That's like a completely foreign experience to you that you're never going to experience. But folks from the Cape, because you were just engaging in maritime, industry, you had to go all around the world looking for whales, selling your products to different places, importing, luxury goods from Asia and Europe and Africa. And how like crazy is that to think, that was just an experience that these people in this otherwise very rural and isolated part of Massachusetts got to have. And just how that then kind of influenced their own relationships with their neighbors or with other, Americans they met in these ports or the people that they met in the ports themselves. And it's just something I feel like a lot of people don't really have an appreciation for, of like, oh, back in the day, well, they didn't have planes, so of course they wouldn't have gone there. And it's like, no, they like went on these insane years-long voyages, sometimes with their families. If you were a captain and your wife was willing to hole up in a tiny little cabin on your boat for 4 years, and just how many of those stories have also been preserved in like diaries and letters and stuff that various historical societies have done a really great job of collecting and reproducing in a way where you can go out and read some of these stories and see what those people were really thinking about. Wow, like I'm in Hawaii. What is that like? And how am I sort of, adjusting to like this? All I've known is Massachusetts or Nantucket or whatever. And now I'm in this tropical island with people from all over the world. So I really love that aspect of it. And, a lot of the places on the Cape, museums, historical societies, libraries have done a really great job of bringing that story to life and have some really cool artifacts. So there are a lot of really nice places to come and just sort of see some of that stuff out on display. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. I'm sure there's other aspects if I let you go on.
Oh,
you
yeah.
could. And there's so many reasons to come here, but that's really, really good what you said. So I have one final question for extra bonus points, okay? what has been your favorite thing? I know you're still fairly new here at this museum, but what has been your favorite thing about your association with the Cape Cod Maritime Museum?
If we're going to get a little personal, so my first jobs in sort of the historical field were a lot more sort of person-facing. I was doing a lot of, coordination with other local historical societies in my hometown of Guilford, Connecticut, alongside the curator at the Guilford Keeping Society, and but also doing stuff like programming for kids, tours of our buildings, helping put out exhibits, physically going through our archives and rehousing stuff in acid-free folders and stuff like that. Once I transitioned into my previous two jobs working at History Associates and with the Postal Inspection Service, it became a lot more behind-the-scenes stuff, which I enjoy a lot because, I like doing the research and the writing and all that sort of stuff. But when the final product would kind of be ready to go, if I was doing a project for, say, the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, I would have to go to New Orleans to see it once it had been fabricated and installed and open to the public. And I would just see it that one day as a tourist. I don't get to sort of see people's, reactions to it in real time. I don't really get to sit with it in any meaningful way and kind of figure out what worked about this, what didn't work. Are there ways we can tweak it when we get cool new donations or, new scholarship has happened, so we need to update some of the panels. Yep. And, one of the things that's really great about being here is that you get all of that in this role, and you get to, have a lot more of that face-to-face interaction with people that are coming to the museum, find out what they're interested in, and just find ways so that you're telling them a story that they're excited about, and also telling them stories you're excited about in ways that will make them excited about it, So that's been really great. And I feel like particularly coming off the pandemic, it's just been nice to sort of be in an environment where it's like that is a little bit more my day-to-day instead of just being kind of quietly sitting in my room reading books, reading newspaper articles, stuff like that. So really enjoyed that. But also just in general, I know I kind of touched on this already, but it's like, because this is a place that, was a big part of my childhood, and I really didn't have a lot of sort of interaction with the history of it because I was 10 years old, and even though I liked history, I wasn't necessarily in charge of what we did on our vacation, so I couldn't be like, I want to go to the historical societies or whatever. It's been nice to sort of have that kind of more intimate relationship with the history of a place that has been very important to me and my family and stuff. And I know I was just a summer tourist, but it's just you get very fond of a place, and it's fun to have that new dimension of understanding how and why it came to be the way that it is. So
yeah. Well, that's great. That all makes perfect sense to me, and it just seems like a really good fit. So I'm glad.
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here. So
great. Well, it seems to me they're very lucky to have you here too.
Well, thank you.
So Emily Sullivan, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Thank you again for hosting me and showing me around the museum. It's a real pleasure, and I look forward to more association at the museum in the future. Look forward to coming back and seeing the lighthouse exhibit and other new exhibits you're going to be.
October 20th.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to make sure our listeners know that if they come to Cape Cod in 2023, and I was going to say and beyond, but how is the lighthouse exhibit slated for a certain period of time?
So in its current iteration, we're planning on it being here until probably spring of 2025, but we basically intend on it being a semi-permanent exhibit. We're going to move it to a different part of the museum in 2025 to make room for something else in that particular part of the museum. And then when we've done that, we'll maybe do a bit of a refresh. So maybe it'll be more focused a little bit on the science of how lighthouses work or something, which is not missing from the current iteration, but it's just sort of not as big of a focus because we want it to be more on the keepers, etc.
Okay.
So we're hoping that there will basically be a permanent presence of lighthouses at this institution with, kind of how can we jazz things up as we need moving forward. But well,
I'm glad to hear it. But as far as the exhibit that will open October 20th, people can see that in the next couple of seasons.
Yes.
So I recommend very highly that our listeners come and check out this museum, along with all the other great things to see on the Cape, lighthouses, and a lot of other things. So again, Emily, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
To learn more, go to CapeCodMaritimeMuseum.org.
Anyone going to Cape Cod to see lighthouses needs to visit the museum, especially after their new lighthouse exhibit opens in October. We have another segment in this episode about a lighthouse in New York State that's not well known, but I think it's pretty unique and interesting.
Right, Jeremy. The lighthouse at Verona Beach was one of 3 built on Oneida Lake to aid navigation in conjunction with the opening of the Barge Canal as part of the Erie Canal system in 1918. The other 2 lighthouses built at the time were at Brewerton and Frenchman's Island. All 3 of the concrete towers are about 85 feet tall. The lighthouse at Verona Beach began service in late summer 1917.
In 1920, New York State created its own department for managing navigational aids, including a program for hiring lighthouse keepers. New York is the only state to ever maintain its own aids to navigation department.
The Verona Beach Lighthouse Association was formed in 2002 to save the lighthouse, which had become a popular site for dumping trash. More than 150 truckloads of debris were removed, and the windows and entry door were replaced.
The New York Power Authority and Canal Corporation are investing more than $300 million over 5 years to revitalize the state's canal system. As part of their Reimagine the Canal program, Verona Beach Lighthouse was renovated and illuminated with LED lighting in 2021.
Terri Knight is a founder and longtime volunteer for the Verona Beach Lighthouse Association, and Bruce Woodward has served as the group's treasurer.
I spoke with Terri and Bruce at Terri's home during a recent visit to New York. Let's listen to that conversation now.
So I'm here at Verona Beach, New York, and I am with Terri Knight and Bruce Woodward, who have both been very involved with the preservation of the Verona Beach Lighthouse here. And thank you so much for being with me, Terri and Bruce. I really appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Thank you for hosting me at your home, Terri. I really appreciate that. So let me ask you, starting out, I think a lot of people probably are surprised that there's a lighthouse where it is here. Why was the lighthouse built here in the first place? And maybe preface that with when was it built and why was it built?
I think it was 1915, wasn't it?
That's when it was completed, the Barge Canal. They were putting in the Barge Canal, and they were putting in the Barge Canal for commercial transportation of large ships. You can go around the world from this area here. And the 3 lighthouses would guide the boats to the canal.
Yeah. So it's an unusual tower compared to the lighthouses we're familiar with, on the Atlantic Ocean or even on the Great Lakes. It doesn't look like a traditional lighthouse, but it still has an active light. Is that correct?
Yeah, every 3 seconds it goes. It blinks on and off. As a matter of fact, my husband and I will call the Canal Corp and say, "Your light's out. It's a 100-watt light bulb."
Yeah.
That every 3 seconds.
Yeah. So this area here, the waterway here, is considered part of the Erie Canal system, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously, historically, a super important waterway connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. So now, Terri, how did you get involved with this lighthouse?
When my husband and I decided we wanted to live up here, we looked for places to live. We found a lot that we really liked, and my husband said, I can build. Most of the other properties up here were older, more like the house next door, were like 100-year-old seasonal.
Basically cottages. No
and
insulation, no.
Right, and he says by the time I renovate and insulate, or a lot of the people, if you look down here, actually tore them down. So we had this lot that we liked. We bought the lot, and over a period of 3 years, we built what you see now. We were boaters, so we always saw the lighthouse, but we never got that close to it. When I walked over to look at the lighthouse, I was like, whoa. It was a dump, literally a dump. There were car tires, bathtubs, bicycles, box springs and mattresses, garbage, literal garbage with rats and little critters running around. And I says, oh, this isn't good. And it was packed up against the lighthouse. The lighthouse was totally concrete at the time, and there were like cracks in it, and it just was not a good situation.
Yeah.
I started asking most of the people up here are seasonal. we are unusual that we're up here year-round. So I started asking people that, and they says, we've tried, we've called the Department of Transportation, we've called the town, we've called everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody said there's anything we can do. I thought, okay, I'll take on that challenge. Filed a DBA, held one little meeting at the American Legion in Sullivan Beach, and just started getting it out there. Save Our Lighthouse. Dues were $5. As a matter of fact, Bruce and I were talking this morning. I think the pin that I have, I think we gave everybody a pin if they $5. We gave them
deal.
their membership card. We started doing dinner theaters. We started doing just different fundraising events. We got up to over 500 members at one point in time.
All over the country.
All over the country. Yeah.
That's great.
Then they started to take notice of us. Then our senators, our politicians, our town supervisor, they all started showing up and taking an interest. And then they took 150 dump trucks of garbage and debris out of there. And then after that, the neighbors got together, put in the concrete sidewalk, we put in the kiosk in the back, we landscaped. We got it to the point where we had to convince the Canal Corp to paint it white.
Yeah.
They said that was not original, that was not historic.
Yeah.
We were told that the lighthouse was non-essential now, that it really...
It was just unpainted before, right?
Right, yes, yeah.
It looks nice white.
Yeah, it looks nice
I
white.
think so, yeah.
Bruce went in one day, we used to keep our lawnmower inside the lighthouse. And did you go in the winter to check on it, and there was ice crystals forming inside, or water?
1 year there was, yeah.
And so we had, now the whole lighthouse is going to deteriorate. And so, again, we put a little pressure on some of the people. We went to the Historic Society. If you see, there's a sign now, Historic Lighthouse. One thing led to another, and this is where we are today. Now, I believe New York realizes the historic significance.
Yeah.
Back in the late 1900s, early 2000, nobody was interested in
Not
doing
so
anything.
much, yeah.
Yeah. And this was around when that you started the group, and then the cleanup happened and everything?
Around 1998, we started building, and I think it was around 2002 that we really took off. We incorporated, we got our 501c3.
Yeah.
And we just had a lot of fun doing it. We'd have cleanup days where people would come from all over, and we'd do hamburgers and hot dogs and soda and stuff, and everybody would get together to clean it up. And
So it was a community effort. Really.
it was a community effort. And
Yeah, we always tried to keep that in the back of our mind. Let's involve the community.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of people out there who think a lot of it.
Yeah. It's a local landmark.
I mean, how many people can say they have a lighthouse in their own backyard?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So what drew you to the lighthouse and the organization here, Bruce?
Well, I grew up on the ocean in Massachusetts, and we had lighthouses all over. Lighthouses, lightships. And growing up, you just kind of took them for granted. Okay. I remember in high school, let's go find a place to party. Well, there's a lighthouse right over there. Sounds good. And looking back, it's like lighthouses were a part of almost everything we did.
They often are sort of like centerpieces for a community, I think.
Yeah. And but if it's too easy to take them for granted if you don't appreciate them. But I moved here, and I was like a fish out of water. I was totally out of my element. No water, wow, what am I doing here? So I heard about this, and I went looking for it, and one thing led to another, and then I heard about a lighthouse association, and I looked into that, and I ran into Terri, and she told me about it, and she's like, oh yeah, I started that years ago. Hey, no problem, yeah.
And you served as the treasurer?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it must, for both of you, it must have been nice to see the restoration work that was done. Was it last year, right?
They just finished.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, there were some people over there a couple weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and now I wish you could stay longer, because if you could see it at night, it illuminates these glowing colors. And even one night around Christmas time, I wish they would do it more. The lighthouse illuminates purple, yellow, green, just variegated colors. It's beautiful. I can't imagine. I'd like to get out on the lake some night to see it. I mean, now you can't miss it.
So is the New York Canal Association that did the restoration? Is that
No,
right?
my understanding, when I talked with them when they were going to start, it was the New York State Department of Transportation.
Okay.
Okay.
But the canal,
In-
maybe the Canal Association's part of under
Yes,
that?
yes.
Yeah, the Canal Corp is part of the New York State Thruway Authority.
Okay.
Same budget, pretty much.
Kind of like a maritime throughway in a way?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, at a certain point in time, somebody decided, well, we need to focus more on the thruway infrastructure rather than any kind of marine aspects. And so not a lot was done for quite a while.
Yeah.
But things are turning around.
Yeah.
The last time I talked with someone from the Department of Transportation about the lighthouse, he said the revenues have gone way down. That was a problem, that the revenues were pretty good there for a while, but people just weren't going through the locks the way they were. Look at the ton of boats we see now. I mean, that's why I'm wondering if they're still charging or if they're...
I don't know. I'm kind of surprised, to be honest, with the price of gas.
Yeah.
There's been talk of, well, people are not going to really take the boat out as often.
But I'm thinking about this restoration again. Again, it must be gratifying for you to see it in such beautiful shape. It was a pretty substantial amount of work they just did.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I would think that my guess is that might not have happened if you didn't raise the awareness of people of the lighthouse.
I would like to think that, but...
I don't think it would have. I think you're right.
It'll be interesting. Brewerton, that's the sister. There's one on Frenchman's Island, which is very difficult to get to, so I don't expect they would be doing much there.
Right.
And this one is in a residential neighborhood. I mean, it's part of the... they tell you when you buy property, look at what's around you, look at the other property. Well, it's our lighthouse. They should keep it up.
So I'm traveling with my friend Jim Malone here, and we're actually going to go see the Brewerton light shortly. So by the way, I just want to mention to people listening, if they can hear, you might be able to hear Seamus the dog in the background here, panting and walking around. He's a really friendly guy, and that's, if you're wondering what that's not me panting. It's,
No, we don't do that.
yeah. But it's a beautiful spot here, and it's great to see this lighthouse. And so I've seen pictures of it over the years. I've never been here before, and it certainly looks better now than it's looked in the pictures in the past, especially before you got involved.
Yeah.
But it's amazing what you accomplished here, and again, thank you so much, and congratulations on what you've accomplished.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I have one final question for you before we wrap it up, though. This is for both of you. What have you enjoyed most about your association with this lighthouse, would you say?
I think the people that we've met.
I was just going to say, yeah.
We've met so many nice people, and I never would have met Bruce, who has always loved lighthouses. Lighthouses were never meant that much to me or were a passion until I moved right next door to one. And the first words out of Bruce's mouth were, "What can I do to help?" A lighthouse, wow. And so many people have said, "I've met you." That's been the best part, and the gratification of seeing where it was before to where it is now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and just the appreciation from people. I used to mow the lawn periodically over there, and I was always amazed at the people that would show up just to look at it.
Yeah. Lighthouse nuts,
Not
mostly.
not knowing if they could even go inside or not.
Yeah.
I would open the door and let them take a peek.
Yeah.
Supervised, but they were so appreciative of it.
Oh, The other thing that, and it's still happening, I mean, you can look out my window there and I can sit on the patio and see the lighthouse. We saw graduation time, they come and take pictures. Proms, they come and take pictures. People have gotten married down there. Weddings.
I was going to say, I had a neighbor that knew I was associated with it. Oh, I'd like to get married down there. Can you do something for me?
And then you'll see a year later, they come back, they've got their baby after their baptism down there. So
That's great.
that's really super. And then there was a model, some professional photographers.
Photo shoot.
Yeah, and we have the bald eagle up here. The bald eagles, at one point in time, were nesting up there.
Oh, wow.
And someone from National Geographic was out here taking pictures of the bald eagle. Of course, the lighthouse.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, they're definitely centerpieces of the community.
Yeah.
This is an example.
They are, and it's kind of
Yeah.
it's a nice feeling.
Yeah, it is.
It gets you involved with the community. You feel like when you walk away, you've accomplished something. You
Yeah.
can turn around and point at it and say, well, I had something to do with that.
Yeah.
I did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
And it's for a good cause.
Yeah.
Well, you did. You guys have accomplished a lot here, and
We had
again-
fun doing it.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much, Terri and Bruce. I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
There is limited parking near Verona Beach Lighthouse. The grounds are open, but it's surrounded by homes, so be sure to respect the privacy of the neighbors.
I want to thank Terri and Bruce for the interview and for their hospitality, and a big thank you also to my friend Jim Malone, who arranged the visit there.
Many thanks also to the volunteers, members, and staff of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Check out uslhs.org to learn more about tours, preservation grants, the passport program, and all the other things the Society offers. Donations and memberships help to support this podcast.
In the next episode of Lighthearted, we'll have a conversation with Lucian Horvat of the Valentia Island Development Company in Ireland. He's had a lot to do with developing Valentia Island Lighthouse as a tourist attraction. I had the pleasure of meeting Lucian when I was in Ireland in July.
The musician Jan Barry once said, quote, "When the darkness comes, keep an eye on the light, whatever that is for you, no matter how far away it seems," unquote.
As always, thanks for listening, and
Keep a good light.
I'm gonna let it shine all in my house. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.